Well, good evening and welcome, everyone. Welcome to the inaugural event in the Becker and Poliakoff Preeminent Speakers in Law, Preeminent Leaders in Law series. My name is Stephen Snavely. I'm a professor of law here. I served as acting dean over the summer when many of the preparations for Attorney General Ellison's visit today were being made. I'm here today on behalf of our interim dean, Nell Newton. I have the great pleasure of introducing Keith Ellison and Gary Rosen today. Keith Ellison was sworn in as Minnesota's 30th Attorney General on January 7, 2019. A graduate of the University of Minnesota Law School, he is the first African American and the first Muslim American to be elected to statewide office in Minnesota. As the people's lawyer, Attorney General Ellison's role is to help Minnesotans live with dignity, safety, and respect. His guiding values are generosity and inclusion. And he is the proud father of 4 adult children, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Elijah, and Amira. From 2007 to 2019, Attorney General Ellison represented Minnesota's 5th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives and was the first African American elected to Congress from Minnesota and the first Muslim to serve in the House or Senate. In this role, he championed consumer, worker, environmental, and civil and human rights protections for Minnesotans. He served for 12 years on the House Financial Services Committee, where he helped oversee the financial services industry, the housing industry, and Wall Street, among others. Among his legislative accomplishments are passing provisions to protect credit card holders from abusive practices and to protect the rights of renters and tenants, a very topical issue today. While in Congress, he founded the Congressional Antitrust Caucus and the Congressional Consumer Justice Caucus. He also served as co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which he helped build to more than 100 members. Before being elected to Congress, Attorney General Ellison served 4 years in the Minnesota House of Representatives. And prior to entering elective office, he spent 16 years as an attorney specializing in civil rights and defense law, including 5 years as executive director of the Legal Rights Center. As the leader of this public interest law firm, he oversaw a team of attorneys focusing on delivering justice for Minnesotans who had nowhere else to turn. He was also a noted community activist. Most recently, Attorney General Ellison led the successful prosecution of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd. The verdict has been hailed as historic, a verdict that signals a pivotal change for the nation. No one verdict can guarantee an end to injustice in policing, but the verdict has rightly been called a tipping point in the fight for racial justice. Attorney General Ellison, thank you for being here today to inaugurate the Becker and Poliakoff Preeminent Leaders in Law Speaker Series. I will now turn the stage over to you for your presentation, after which Gary Rosen of the law firm Becker, which has generously made this speaker series possible, will join you for a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. And let me be among the first to say thank you to the people, the family of Becker and Poliakoff for this inaugural lecture, which really signals an investment in education and legal education of students in Florida and throughout the state of the United States. It is what is expected of successful lawyers when they do well. We want them to do good. So, Gary Rosen, thank you on behalf of your law firm. It's much appreciated. Thank you to the dean. Thank you to the faculty. Thank you to the students. Thank you all. I think it's important that we have a conversation about a critical issue facing our nation, a critical issue that is historic, a critical issue that is nationwide, a critical issue that has resulted in tremendous social and economic disruption in our society, and that issue is the conflict between police and communities, particularly communities of color. We talk about it, and I know that folks want to talk about the Chauvin case. But this situation is so much deeper, so much older, so much more historic than one case. So if I were to plunge into that case, I fear that you would say, well, you guys won. That solved it, right? Absolutely not. All this case represents is accountability for one person who violated the law. It does not represent justice. The job of justice is our job, which is why I say it's a time for action. Time for action. A time when we need the federal government, the state government, municipal governments, police departments, all to really have some courageous conversations as to how we create liberty and justice for all Americans. Okay. And let me just start with this message. Truth, uncompromisingly told, will always have its jagged edges. You're not going to talk about this critical issue without at some point stepping on somebody's toes. It simply isn't possible. But I want you to know that a year before I ever heard the name George Floyd, me and the Commissioner of Public Safety in Minnesota, who was a former police chief in St. Paul Metropolitan Transit Policing, and who was a cop through and through, bleeds blue, we convened a group called the Working Group on Reducing Deadly Force Encounters with Police. We had police officers there, but we didn't just have police officers there. We had rural officers there. We had urban officers there. We had sheriffs there. And we also had BLM representatives. We had the ACLU present, and we had tribal communities there. We had people who represented the autistic community, LGBTQ community. We got the community around the table, came up with 28 solid recommendations. And let me tell you, we had some tough conversations, but every single member of the working group endorsed these recommendations. And the recommendations include everything from changing the use of force, legal requirements, to prioritizing duty to intervene, prioritizing things like the duty to render aid, prioritizing the requirement to make life a sacred and upholding the sanctity of life. And we also emphasize the importance of officer wellness. Because if you as a police officer start a shift and the first call you get is a woman who's been assaulted by her partner, then the next call you get is somebody who has been perhaps shot, and you see some 16-year-old on the ground bleeding out. And then the next call you see is maybe a child who's been sexually assaulted. You do that day after day, year after year, it will begin to weigh on you, and you will not be able to render your best service. So officer wellness becomes important, particularly given the fact that if an officer gave a candid expression and said how they really felt, you and I know that could end up in discovery. So we had to create a situation where it wouldn't end up in discovery, and that officer could really engage in a candid therapeutic session, which would allow them to be their best self and wouldn't be the subject of litigation and discovery and deposition. But we had to do all those things. I offer this to you because these conversations can be had, and I encourage you to continue them or begin them. When law ends, tyranny begins. John Locke. We are in a law school, an institution dedicated to the study of law. Law, the idea that we're going to have rules in our society that we all can live by and know so that we can have foreseeability, so that we can have some modicum of justice. Because if there is no law, then we have arbitrary law of the jungle, where the powerful will oppress the weak, the strong will oppress the small, where the wealthy will oppress the poor. That is the kind of society that literally no one wants to live in. So we need law to protect us from each other often. Institutions like a law school before you sit down as a 1L to take even your first torts class, you walk in the door, the first lesson as you walk in the door is that law is important. Law helps human beings have civilized society to resolve conflict in a way that leaves everybody able to walk away. Law helps us do that. Law, however, has been what we've been missing, because even though we have law, where law is not applied evenly and fairly, we have arbitrariness. And where we have arbitrariness, you have a sense that anything can happen. And what else can you describe what happened to George Floyd as other than a situation where he was under the whim of somebody else, not law, not governed by law? What we're trying to do is make sure that there's one standard of law, that no one is beneath it, no one is above it. No one can just ignore the law at their whim, and nobody is so far below the rest of us that whatever happens to them is just okay. But this admonishment is critical to us because we have a very important role to play in this moment, as I am asking us to really think about how we bring about a greater level of justice, a greater level of understandability, and a greater level of safety for everyone. John F. Kennedy gave us this advice: those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. This is not a threat. It is a description of human behavior. It's not a threat. It's a description of human behavior. Did the United States, what we know as the United States, what was the 13 colonies, they could not work it out peaceably with the King of England. Does that start early enough? Is that rudimentary enough? The bottom line is, if we have a condition where a discrete and insular group of people are subject to arbitrary state action that is often violent and costs lives, don't be shocked when we see riot, civil unrest. We simply have to embrace the fact that as long as we allow an unfair condition to exist among us, there will be side effects. So let's talk about the status quo. Let's talk about what we have now. Let's talk about the way the world was before George Floyd and even into this moment, even though we are in a moment of change, I believe. Police settlements. Public records indicate from 31 of 50 cities with the highest police to civilian ratios, 538, the statistician analysis shows that cities have spent more than $3 billion to settle misconduct lawsuits over the past 10 years. $3 billion that could go to playground equipment, $3 billion that can go to lights, $3 billion that can go to fixing the streets, fixing the roads. If we simply would say, you must obey the law whether you have a badge or not. Examples: City of New York, 2019 paid out $175 million in civil judgments and claims for police-related lawsuits. Chicago, $85 million. Since 2003, Minneapolis police have misconduct payouts have topped $70 million. George Floyd, $27 million. Oh, in the one case that you may never have heard of, but any Minneapolitan in the room will know, a woman named Justine Rustick, a white woman from a wealthy neighborhood, shot and killed by a Minneapolis police officer, $20 million. I'm saying that if we will embrace this problem and try to really solve it, we will save lives, we will save money. Also civil unrest. I mentioned the Kennedy quote. The cost of civil unrest, $500+ million in damages in the Twin Cities alone. Across 20 states, could cost insurance companies $1 billion to $2 billion, possibly making them the most expensive in U.S. history. I'm telling you that premiums, everybody will pay those higher ones. Nobody will escape the higher insurance premiums, even if your building was not burned or the glass broken. Costliest civil disorders. Take a look. May 26th to June 8th, 20 states, 1 to 2 billion. And then Los Angeles in 92, 775 million. You know, Los Angeles in 65, 44. Detroit, 42 million. Miami, 65 million. Washington, D.C., New York, there you go. It is cost effective. The business case for dealing with police accountability is solid. One author I would recommend to you, America on Fire by Elizabeth Hinton. According to America on Fire by Yale University law professor Elizabeth Hinton, between 1964 and 2001, there were nearly 2,000 urban rebellions in the United States that were sparked by racially biased policing. That's scholarship right there. You can check it out. Again, my point is to try to argue to you that not doing anything and hoping it'll get better is not a good strategy. Deadly force, about 1,000 people a year killed by the police annually. Not all of them are killed unconstitutionally. It's just a number. 6,600 people shot and killed by police since 2015. Only 10 days in this year where there were no police shootings. And 98% of the killings by police during this 7-year period have not resulted in officers being charged with a crime. Maybe they shouldn't. I'm not saying that 98 should be 50%. It could, maybe it's not. I have declined many cases where investigations required that we not charge the officer. I have declined cases where they should not be charged. But 98 seems a little high. Now, one thing is incalculable. One thing you can't put a number on, and that is when a person in a low-income neighborhood of color is victim of a crime by a neighbor or a fellow citizen, not a police officer, their trepidation associated with calling, right? You can't put a number on that. If you have a victim of domestic violence who's worried about calling the police because she doesn't know what they're going to do when they get there, and she, what is that worth? All the calls that weren't made. Let me tell you, if somebody is in a neighborhood and who is an antisocial actor who commits crime in the neighborhood level, call them gang members, call them whatever you want, if they know that the neighborhood that they're in is a neighborhood where people won't call the police because there's a trust problem, that means that neighborhood is doubly suffers because they're dealing with chronically bad policing, and they're dealing with the local criminals who know that they can operate with a little bit more impunity than other parts of the neighborhood. That's why one of my arguments to you is that it's not we make police accountable or we have safe streets. It's we make police accountable and we have safe streets. Because where trust is restored, people will make those calls. They will cooperate with the investigation. They will show up when they get those subpoenas, and neighborhoods will be safer. And so, the loss of trust. Damage to the city and trust, social disintegration, and exploiting divisions. Now, here's another one. Those of you who are interested in foreign policy, let me tell you something. You know who knows everything I just said? This is audience participation. Name one foreign actor who knows everything I just said. Yep. Absolutely right. The fire was already burning. All Putin had to do was pour on the gasoline. The polarization of American society has become a national security threat, acting as a barrier to collective action necessary for combating catastrophes and thwarting external dangers. We're not hiding anything from anyone. In fact, they don't understand a few things. They don't understand that our openness is actually a strength of our country. But we don't understand that we have divisions that can be agitated and can undermine the stability in our society. Nobody's happier than a hostile foreign actor when they know that they can get between us because we will not solve our problems. Now, this is sort of a turning point in my conversation with you, that what we've just been talking about is the status quo. This is a long quote, but forgive me for reading it to you. The man you see pictured there, those of you who are studying con law, is a very important person. He's not a lawyer, but maybe one of America's greatest lawyers depended on him. Thurgood Marshall needed to prove that segregation, separate but equal, was damaging to black school children. How did he do that? He used the work of this man, Kenneth Clark, who did a doll study which showed that black children in segregated education environment suffered damage to self-esteem, initiative, and a whole range of injuries to themselves. But then, over a decade later, he was called to speak to the McCone Commission. And he said, this is what he said to the McCone Commission. And let me just tell you, if you don't, not the McCone Commission, the Kerner Commission. Some of you may have heard of it, some of you may not have, but I can tell you in 1968, after there was civil unrest in maybe 200 different cities, including Detroit and many others, Congress came together and the President Johnson said, we're going to study what this is all about, and brought together experts. And I would urge anyone who's curious about dealing with police issues to read the Kerner Commission report. But this is one of the quotes that he gave at the hearing. I read that report of the 1919 riot in Chicago. 1919? How old is this problem? And it is as if we were reading the report of the investigating committee on the Harlem riot of 1935. The report on the investigating committee of the Harlem riot of 343. The report on the McCone Commission on the Watts riot. I must again in candor say to you, members of this commission, it is like an Alice in Wonderland with the same moving pictures reshown over and over and over again, the same analysis, the same recommendations, the same inaction. Which is why the headline when I first started these slides was A Time for Action. The United States Congress, where I spent 12 years, and Kendrick's father spent probably about the same, right? Or maybe more. They have just thrown their hands up and said they're not going to take action on the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And that's really sad. How many more riots do you want? I mean, what do you wait? What do you think is going to happen? Well, we know what's going to happen. It is not good that they did not take action. But the good news is that a lot of states are taking action, and some municipalities are taking action, and even a lot of police departments are taking action. And we have to take action. That good-looking guy right there, that's John Harrington. The other guy's me. I told you about our working group on reducing deadly force encounters. We started meeting in August 17th. He and I were like the first two black guys to be statewide, office holders, right? So we figured, what are we here for if we're not going to start an uncomfortable conversation? What's the point? Get somebody else in here if we won't do anything. This is before George Floyd. 28 recommendations, 33 action steps. I urge you to read the report. Since then, no action on the George Floyd Justice Policing action, limited action on state and city level. I said, by the way, nobody was killed. We did not do this working group in response to a tragedy. Do you ever notice how we always do these reports after some tragedy? 21st century policing was after Ferguson. That's Obama, right? And you can name report after report after report. We said, we're not waiting around. Let's do it now. Let's talk about it now. And as I already described to you, we got some folks who spent 30 years in policing together with folks who died in the wool, BLM members, and somehow they had meaningful conversations. And I'm very proud of that. It can happen. Don't think we can't get these folks in the room. We're better than in a law school setting. I will tell you that there have been some departments that have made meaningful change. Newark police officers fired 0 shots in 2020. Reform overhaul cited. Now in 2021, Newark had some issues. Not a lot. Way less than others. But Newark Police Department was renowned for an abysmal relationship between police and community for decades. They said, we're going to do something about it. We're going to do something now, and they did. Ithaca in New York. Most ambitious effort yet to reform policing may be happening in Ithaca. So that's happening there. And then Camden, reimagining its force. Let me tell you, in all three of these cities, police are still responding to domestic violence, robbery and progress, drug sales, all the stuff that they ever do. But they somehow have reduced the level of deadly force encounters with police, and they actually have done pretty well on stopping crime and even turning guns in. The other side of reform is not lawlessness and no police. And I'm going to tell you, defund the police is a hashtag slogan that really has no policy implications at all. I don't support it. You don't support it, probably. But yet that moniker was lifted up as the deal. It's not the deal. Minneapolis Police Department in 2019 had a budget of about $193 million. Now it's about $200 million. So defund where? What? Now there have been some changes in the budget. Money has been allocated for civilian crime reduction specialists, mental health, dual response. We have shifted people. It's not a matter of how many police you have. It's a matter of what are they doing. And some of them we do need solving problems of chemical dependency, homelessness, and other and mental health questions. That's legit, but you don't need a badge and a gun for that. You didn't need 4 guys with badges and guns to look into a fake $20 bill. Does anybody know why I mentioned that? Oh, yeah. So no one is above the law or beneath the law. I already talked about that. You might think, why would Ellison put that image in front of us? Because what I want to tell you from an African-American historic perspective, it's the same thing. That's a lynching in Duluth, Minnesota. And this is a human being down here too. And what shocks me more than the bodies is the look on that gentleman's face. Do you see him? These guys pushing in. By the way, they burned down the police precinct in Duluth that day too. 10,000 people showed up. In Minneapolis, sadly, the 3rd precinct got burned down, tragically, I think. But it happened there as well. My point is, this year, the difference is that he has on a badge, he's sanctioned by law, and they're not. But they threatened the police and told them to get out, and they did. There is a historic parallel between these two things. And from the standpoint of somebody who sees this, they don't see themselves as not the victim of one and potentially the victim of the other. I don't mean to give you a gross picture. I just want to help you see how your neighbor might see these two images. Lessons from the Chauvin trial. The murder of George Floyd was typical and it was not. It's typical because, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Walter Scott, Laquan McDonald, go on and on. But it was not because it took place in front of all these people. Notice how many people in this group are black. Not all of them. All of them were appalled. You see several white people in here. This is not just one group of people upset by what they're seeing. All of them were. None of them got off the curb except for Alyssa Funari over there. And because the officers said, get back on the curb. And when these people were traumatically watching this horrible situation unfold, he's yelling, I can't breathe. They're yelling, get off of him. They still stayed on that curb And some of them felt really guilty about that, but they did the right thing. They did all they can do. If I told almost all of them, if you would have gotten off that curb, you would have been shot. And there is little doubt about that. But what else did they do? They called the police because they still believe in the police, even as one of their own is operating that way. It exposed hidden realities. I tell you, when I was in law school, I organized community when some friends of mine were beat up by the police and charged with disorderly conduct. They told me they didn't do anything. I believed them. We organized some rallies about it. I was 24, 23. A camera shows up and films us kind of talking about how the Embassy Suites 5 are innocent. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a law student at this time. A friend of mine says to me, Keith, I saw you on TV the other day, and let me tell you about my police encounter. I was driving down the street. The officer pulled me over. I pulled over. The officer told me that my belt to my overcoat was hanging out of the door, and that I needed to open the door and pull my belt back in, because otherwise my coat could get ruined. Closed the door, told me to have a nice day. And I did. She said, that's how I see the police, Keith. What you're talking about and your friends, I don't know what you guys are talking about. He says, you're my friend and I believe you, but I'm telling you, she said this to me, we live in the same geographic space, but we live in different worlds. I said, that's insightful. Now, can you guess something about my friend? Yeah. She had a lot, and she showed up at some of our meetings, and she cared. But she had to share her reality. And until we understand her reality, it's hard to ever get her to have sympathy for George Floyd's reality. And it may start off cerebral, but it will get down to the heart if we keep talking and listening. Global impact. The global impact of George Floyd is shocking. Buenos Aires to Brisbane, Cardiff, Wales to Cape Town, South Africa, Dakar, Senegal to Dublin. I was in Lisbon a week ago. George Floyd paintings up on the wall. I'm telling you, the whole world saw this. And the whole world, I believe, thinks the United States has the best chance to have a free, prosperous society. But they see this. Do you know how much good we can do for the world, for the rule of law, for civil and human rights, for dignity, to restrain government and make sure that state-sponsored actors operate ethically and morally? We can do good for the world if we take action. We can do good for the world if we take action. If you all who have traveled abroad, you know that other governments look to the United States as to what they can do and what they can't. This is important. Justicia para George Floyd. I don't even know what country that's in. But you see it. When we convicted Derek Chauvin, I wasn't joyous. I wasn't proud. What I felt is that that man's life's going to change a lot. And he has a mother, and he has a family, and he has kids. I also felt that somebody who was entrusted to protect and serve the community, including George Floyd, has now just been found by a jury of his peers to have murdered George Floyd. And that's sad. So the crowds outside were jumping for joy, and I felt like I wasn't in the mood to jump for no joy. But I felt privileged to be playing that role in justice. And only those of us who are lawyers have the opportunity to make something like that happen. because where law ends, chaos and tyranny begin. Law without you is just words on a page. Law with you is liberty and justice for all. You are entrusted with a mighty, mighty, mighty responsibility to have a society where we live under law, not under the arbitrary whim of a powerful person. And so this was our team. No, they are not all standing on cardboard boxes. I'm just that short. But they were a great group. I want to wrap up by saying that it's not just policing. In fact, policing is kind of the leaves on the trees. But these are the roots. We have a massive housing crisis all over this country. Who are the police asked to keep in line? The unhoused, the homeless, the poor. We have massive wealth disparities. The wealth disparities are destabilizing to our society. I'm not saying rich people can't be rich. I'm saying this vast expanse is unhealthy for our society. We need to correct educational disparities which spring from residential segregation and much more. If we fix these problems, we will begin to make progress on the policing issue as well. So can we break the cycle of inaction? Yes, if we act. Yes, if we act. It's not acceptable for Congress to just say, we tried. We have to demand that they get back at it. And you don't have to be a Republican or Democrat or a liberal or a conservative. You can be both and believe in liberty and justice for all and rule of law. And this may be the most important thing I want to leave with you. Soak it in. A lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite on society. You are either helping things get better or you're not. And let me tell you, just because you're some lefty public defender doesn't mean that you are in the first category and not the second. If all you do is start shoving the sentencing guidelines in your client's face before you even read the file, you ain't helping. But whether you are in private practice, corporate counsel, public lawyer, public defender, prosecutor, whatever, we all can advance this cause of justice, and we all have a responsibility to do so. So I just want to thank you all for listening. It's been a tremendous honor to spend my day with you, and I think me and Gary are going to talk a little bit now.
Well, thank you, Attorney General Ellison, for such an enlightening and sobering and inspiring talk. And Gary Rosen has now joined us on the stage for a conversation. This conversation will include questions that audience members have previously submitted. I want to just take a moment to introduce Gary Rosen. Gary Rosen joined Becker in 1982 and went on to serve as chair of the firm's 50-plus attorney litigation practice before assuming his current role as managing shareholder and chief executive officer as the proud successor of the strong leadership of the late Gary Poliakoff and Alan Becker. Becker, as many of you know, was a major South Florida headquartered law firm with over 130 lawyers and lobbyists in 15 offices in Florida, Washington, D.C., New York, and New Jersey. And as Becker's managing partner, Gary oversees the firm's governance and plays a leading role in practice management, recruitment, marketing, and other business functions. He's also a Florida Bar Board certified business litigation attorney, handling complex litigation on behalf of public and private clients throughout the United States. And a longtime board member and a major donor to the United Way of Broward County, he currently serves as chair of its board of directors. Mr. Rosen was the 2019 recipient of the Daily Business Review's Attorney of the Year Award and was recognized for his work in creating a pioneering professionalism and civility magistrate pilot program in the Broward County Circuit Court. He's also been named a power leader in law by the South Florida Business Journal and has been recognized as one of Florida's 500 most influential business leaders every year since Florida Trend magazine began publishing its annual list. It is Gary's great privilege, for which I am profoundly grateful, and I know Dean Newton and the faculty and students are profoundly grateful. It is Gary's great privilege to establish this speaker series to honor the legacy of Alan Becker and Gary Poliakoff, the founding partners of the Becker firm, and both of whom were proud alumni of the law school. So thank you, Gary, for your support, for Becker support, and for your vision in establishing the speaker series. I will now leave it to the two of you for a conversation.
So welcome, everybody. Do I see Marnie Becker in the audience? Marnie, could you please stand up and be recognized? Alan Becker's daughter, everybody. Is Keith Poliakoff here as well? Keith, please stand up. So thank you for those thought-provoking remarks. There's quite a bit of food for thought there, Attorney General Ellison, and I appreciate you agreeing to be with us for the inaugural event of the Alan S. Becker and Gary A. Poliakoff Preeminent Leaders in Law Speaker Series. It's my privilege. So if we could, let's talk a little bit about you just for a moment. You're now Attorney General of Minnesota, obviously, having been elected for a first term. But when you ran for Attorney General, you gave up what was widely considered to be a very safe seat in Minnesota's 5th District. And you served in that seat for, I believe, 6 terms, 12 years. So tell us, why would a politician give up a very safe seat to run in a contested election, a potentially risky election, to become Attorney General of the state of Minnesota?
And I took a pay cut, too.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Well, here's the thing. In life, if you're clear on what you want to do and what you're trying to achieve, you go for it. I never got into politics because I was trying to climb some sort of imaginary ladder, right? So I never really thought to myself, well, if Congress is good, maybe the next step is Senate, maybe the next step is this. I never really saw it that way. I saw myself as somebody who's supposed to be in service. And I did come to the conclusion that I could be of more service as state AG. And I can give you any number of examples of that, but I'll just give you this one. When I was in Congress, I had a bill to challenge or stop the use of non-compete agreements for low-wage fast food workers. I think we can all agree that a Jimmy John's sandwich maker should not be prohibited from seeking a slightly higher wage at McDonald's or Burger King, and yet they work. You don't hire my people, I won't hire yours. Keep the wages locked in at the federal minimum. I thought that was appalling. Now, did I get I was in the majority. Did I get a hearing on my bill? No. Did I get a vote on my bill on the floor? Absolutely not. The bottom line is that we didn't go anywhere. Within a month of getting to be in the Attorney General's office, we had sued those companies doing that, but we had brought them to a consent agreement where they wouldn't do it and would face significant civil penalties if they violated their word. And as a result, folks making $725, making 10, 11, 12, I mean, they did better. And that means a lot in this economy. We also started a wage theft unit. I couldn't start a wage theft unit. Now, what is a wage theft unit? All a wage theft unit is that if you tell your workers you're going to pay them $10 an hour and you pay them $9.25 and put the rest in your pocket, that's illegal. Now, what would happen if a McDonald's worker took a box of frozen hamburgers out the back door? That's called? Okay, well, what is it when the employer says, I'm going to pay you $10, but I only give you $9.25? That's theft too. And then, we in Congress, I couldn't start a conviction review unit, prosecutor-led, where we will review legitimate claims of innocence. Nobody's gotten out yet, but we are reviewing files. We started a statewide expungement program. Now, certain convictions are excluded: no sex crimes, no murder, no enhanceables. Like if you got a DUI and you can get it, if you do it again, you can get a gross or whatever. None of those, but like drug offenses, stuff like that. Why? Because we believe that you're not the worst thing you ever did, and that if we just say you sold or were caught in possession of 5 grams of crack 15 years ago, therefore you can never be part of our society, that is a waste of human resource. Couldn't do that in Congress. So I've been able to do all those things, and we got bigger plans. We want to do some things on sex trafficking in greater Minnesota. We want to do some things, and we want to do more than we're doing now. We want to do some more on antitrust because we believe in competitive markets and flexible labor markets and innovation and new products. And we think that given the concentration of so many industries, that might be a problem. So I can just do more. And I'm having more fun.
Well, it doesn't sound like you're looking back.
No. I put it like this. On January 6th, I felt sorry for my friends, but I was glad not to be there. Yeah.
So it wasn't long after George Floyd's death that Minnesota's governor, Governor Walz, appointed you to prosecute Derek Chauvin.
Right.
Did you have a sense at that early moment how focused the entire nation, and as you've shown us, the entire world, would be on that case, and what a powerful force for social change it would be?
No, I didn't. Once we got that case, we put blinders on and focused. And it came as somewhat of a shock to see such attention. We initially opposed the motion to televise the trial because we were worried that witnesses might be intimidated from coming forward if they thought they were going to be on worldwide television. The judge, to his credit, honored our motion to say that if you were 17 when the offense occurred, that you didn't have to be on camera. And so I have to admit I was wrong about that. I think it ended up being a good thing. But I must say that I did not apprehend or grasp the enormity of that moment. And I still don't think I really do.
It is hard to grasp, I think, for many of us. I watched a good deal of the trial. One of the unintended consequences of a pandemic is that instead of being in the office, you're home. And I have to say I was riveted by the trial as a trial lawyer myself. The trial lawyers you appointed to prosecute Derek Chauvin did an absolutely remarkable job. As a tradesman in that world, I was really marveling at how well they performed. And I'll just name a few of the lawyers who led that trial, and we know that it was a large team, as we saw in that photograph that you took. Jerry Blackwell, Matthew Frank, Stephen Schleicher, Erin Eldridge, and I believe there were at least 13 in all in the trial team. How did you go about selecting them?
Well, Jerry Blackwell, we sued CenturyLink because we thought we should. Who's on the other side of the table? Jerry Blackwell. We sue 3M. Who's on the other side of the table? Jerry Blackwell. Okay, we're about to sue this other company. Who's there? Jerry Blackwell. And Jerry's a good friend of mine. I mean, I think he's a wonderful guy. I love the guy, but he's always on the other side, which is good because it's nice to be able to talk to somebody about how we're going to get where we got to go. He's never, you've dealt with folks who are in it for the fight. Jerry's in it for the solution, and that's always good. But when this happened, I said, look, man, how many boats can you ski behind? How many Teslas are you going to buy? How many fancy houses are you going to get? I mean, you got a place there, you got a place there. You're doing well. You're not about to be like in the free cheese line, Why don't you help us out? He said, okay. I said, don't you want to know how much I can pay you? He says, nope, don't worry about it. So he was a guy like you, Gary. But I'm telling you, having a civil litigator on a criminal case was actually a tremendous benefit. First of all, he couldn't get along with the regular prosecutors. I mean, he got along with them, but he was bewildered on many fronts. Well, you mean we have to give him all this?
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, we gotta give it to him, man. Oh my God. But he brought up things like doing a mock, which is something we normally would never think about. He talked to us about using a jury consultant, which is something that we probably would not have used. I mean, the state doesn't tend to have that many bells and whistles. But and honestly, the problem was not that we couldn't afford it. The problem is I think we got into a way of doing things, and he really kind of challenged some of our basic assumptions, which to me means never allow too much groupthink to get into what you're doing, right? Make sure you got somebody who's going to say, well, what if we tried this? And somebody on the team said, well, he's never been in front of a criminal jury. And I'll never forget, Jerry says, there's no such thing as a criminal jury. There's no such thing as a civil jury. There are people who make decisions, mostly on emotion, and that is what there is. And Steve Slisher. Now, Steve Slisher was a career prosecutor. And then he left and went to a big firm. And so now he's the civil litigator there. And Steve, as a U.S. attorney, was in charge of the Jacob Wetterling case. Now, I don't know if you all ever heard of that case, but this is a heartbreaking case where an 11-year-old kid just one day never comes home. His mom doesn't know what happened. His dad doesn't know what happened. Nobody knows what happened. 20 years later, they get a tip of who did it. Steve gets the case, and they end up, resolving the case in order to find the whereabouts of Jacob Wetterling's remains. So it was in Minnesota. It was like really big news, and so he brings that to the game. He'd also prosecuted police officers before as a assistant U.S. attorney, and so he was really important. We said to him, the use of force case, we need you to lead that part of what we're doing. Jerry, who's deals with complicated issues of medical causation, we need him to do that. And then the regular prosecutors, we let them deal with the witnesses that you saw up on the screen. I'm like, this is you guys' bailiwick. This is what you do. Now, the fact that we had so many people really wasn't my fault. They kept asking me if they could help. And I thought to myself, why not? As long as you stay in your lane and play nice in the sandbox, we're going to let you be part of what is a historic trial. So some people didn't do anything other than maybe write one memo on one motion in limine. But they were proud to have been able to play that role. And so most of the people were our folks, but we did have a brilliant lawyer named Neil Katyal, who's an appellate lawyer. Some of y'all may know Neil because Neil's on TV a lot. But one thing I learned recently, that Neil may be, the lawyer of color to have made the most Supreme Court appearances. Now, up until recently, it was Thurgood Marshall. But Neil, we now hear, has more appearances than even Thurgood Marshall, which is good company to be in, I would say. So we had a good team, but some of the folks who the world doesn't know and never has seen, they were great. I mean, even some of the folks were folks who just made sure that we kept track of the enormous volume of discovery, which is not easy. Some of the folks who you saw in there were young lawyers who they're like those basketball players who die for the ball, and come up with Spalding tattooed on their forehead, man. They don't care. They'll do it. They just want to be there. And I thought it was good for the whole office. And, of all 400 of our office teammates, many of them didn't have anything to do with the case. Most of them didn't. But they were all proud that the Minnesota Attorney General's office was involved here. And they all felt really proud about it. And I'm glad they did. And some of them didn't think we should take the case. They said, that's going to politicize us. We shouldn't do that. Afterwards, I had several people say, you know what? I'm glad you took that case. And I said to them, what else could I do? Say, I don't want to help. We can help, but we won't. So
you mentioned a moment ago that at Jerry Blackwell's urging, that you performed a mock trial. And that's something that actually is relatively commonly done, especially in large civil cases. I've done a number of mock trials myself before major trials, and I've always learned something, more than something, from doing those mock trials. What did you learn from the mock trial that you did?
Well, I would need a list because there's so many things. One thing we learned is that if we start going after the police, we're going to lose people. And I know a lot of folks wanted to see us criticize the police or policing as an institution. In fact, the mock helped us know what we kind of suspected, which is that we needed to be the ones polishing the badge as opposed to Chauvin, who dirtied it up. We were the ones defending the honor of all the police officers who do the job right. That was important. The other thing we learned is that, so this is human. This is the human part of it. I had 3 people who were like, I want to do the opening. I want to do the opening. I want to do the closing. I want to, you can imagine. That never happens.
Never. No, lawyers have no egos.
No egos at all. The mock, we had the mock jurors rate everybody, and it came out how it came out. And I'm like, I didn't pass you over. They did, and they don't know you. So that was, and so there was a range of things, but we learned a lot, and we learned, and here's the other thing, we learned that if we got the right, we learned what jurors we needed to absolutely keep off. We learned what jurors we really, really needed to keep, and we realized we weren't going to be able to do that because any defense attorney worth their salt is going to get rid of them. But we knew our, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So we knew our 3s. We were probably good. We wanted to hang on to them, and so doing that, being able to scope out. Oh, and we knew that we better get on social media and do our own research on the jurors. Because they'll say, oh, me fair? Absolutely fair. Who, me? Whatever. I'm like, okay, you were at every police brutality rally, you're not. And by the way, we didn't want anybody who was quote unquote like too much on our side because we just saw that as potentially being a problem on appeal in a lot of ways. So we wanted solid middle of the road folks. So, because we actually did take a fair trial for Derek Chauvin very seriously. We see ourselves as ministers of justice. As a defense counsel, your job is zealous advocate, full stop, and that's it. And that is our system. But as prosecutor, we kind of think it's our job to represent the state and to make sure that the defendant gets a fair trial. And, Jerry couldn't get that either. It's like, what? Anyway.
So anyone who's tried cases knows that you go through kind of a debriefing process after the trial's over. I imagine that your team and you must have done that as well. Looking back on the trial, is there anything that you think that perhaps should have been handled differently?
Yeah, there is. I'll give you one example. We served search warrants on the hospital that George Floyd was brought to, and we assumed we got everything. You may remember a piece of the trial that y'all saw, that the defendant's medical examiner said that it was possible that George Floyd died from carbon monoxide poisoning. Suddenly, in the middle of the trial, somebody says, they ran blood gas on George Floyd. He absolutely did not have carbon monoxide poisoning. Here's the document. I'm like, well, why didn't we have that? Didn't we serve this? Didn't we do that? Didn't we? Yeah, but, we got everything on the medical examiner's side, but we didn't get everything on the side where they were treating him, trying to revive him. I think I threw what I had in my hand on the ground, pretty mad about not having everything. But, and the judge probably made the right decision, because we're like, Judge, we want to let the jury know that. And the judge said no, because you've already done your direct. And if he would have had that, you'd have disclosed it, and he wouldn't have said some things that he said. Now you're going to be able to ambush him. I'm not letting you do it. We didn't get too mad about it, because I kind of thought the judge was probably right. But it was something that I was a little steamed about. And, that happens. You do trials. Why do you do trials? Because you don't know what the verdict's going to be. But that one was one I wish we had back. And I don't really blame my team, but I put it like this. Now it's like, did we get everything? Are you sure we got everything? Are you sure that you're sure that we got everything? So,
Was there any point during the trial that you thought the case was in trouble?
Yeah. There was a time when we went home all kind of bummed. Again, you all who watched the trial, we had a case agent so George Floyd had made a lot of statements as he was pleading for his life. Some of it was clear, and some of it there was crosstalk and not intelligible. And on cross, the defense attorney got our case agent to say, well, couldn't he have said, I ate too many drugs? And our case agent says, that's possible. So that wasn't a good day. We kind of fixed it up on redirect, but still, there you go, right? So those things occurred. And then, quite honestly, trial lawyers are a lot of type A personalities. I mean, they just are. And you don't really lead type A personalities, right? What you do is you guide them. I kind of saw my role as like a choir conductor, not a football. I wasn't a football coach. You do this, you do that. I was kind of like, I don't play the flute, you do. You know how to play the flute, but I do know how to get all of y'all playing together. So that's kind of the role that I played. But sometimes I had to go to some people and say, the way you talk to so-and-so, teamwork makes the dream work. You got to remember, everybody here has an ego. You do, they do. You got to start talking about how dumb their idea is. We're gonna have a schism. Can't afford it.
So putting 13 lawyers together on a team wasn't all hearts and flowers?
It wasn't all hugs and roses and kisses and sunshine. But but I'm proud of them, because they did get through it. They did get through it. They really did, and they're all like great friends now, and they're even talking about, well, hey, what if you came to our firm? So I'm like, okay, here we go. But yeah, they're trying to recruit some of my AGs away from me, and I don't appreciate that, But one thing is if you're a public lawyer and you got a superstar, there's a better than 50% chance that they're gonna leave you sooner or later. So you just get out of them what you can while they're there. So.
And then you look for the next one.
And then you look for the next one, because there's another one coming.
Right.
Yeah.
So I read in an NPR interview that you gave after the trial, and you mentioned this in your talk earlier, that the verdict was about accountability, not
Yeah,
justice. And
right.
I'd like you to expand on that a little bit for us.
Right. So when you think about the justice was done, in the light of the history that Kenneth Clark laid out, starting from that 1919, there's no way that one conviction of one officer on one occasion sort of sets that aright. But it is incredibly important and valuable, isn't it? Think about how we'd have all felt if we'd have lost. So I didn't want to say, well, this makes up for that, or this somehow restores. I may have gotten to the point of justice if Congress would have passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, if you'd have seen more movement from people who are responsible for making sure we live in a free democratic society. But at that point, all we really had is this trial success, and Colorado has taken action. Other states have made motions. There's been some good things that have happened, even if it's just improving your training situation. But I also said in my remarks, now it's in your hands. And what I meant is, we've tried the case and we delivered a verdict. Now we've got to carry it forward in society, which is why, Gary, I'm very honored to receive invitations like the one you've bestowed upon me tonight, because it gives me a chance to sort of evangelize about the need to keep moving. And my clear recognition that it's people like you that are going to get this done. You're going to get this done.
So let's talk about the George Floyd Police Reform Act that has recently apparently been stalled with little hope for revival.
Yeah,
that was a negotiation, according to the news that I read. That was a negotiation primarily between Senator Booker of New Jersey and Senator Scott on the our side from South Carolina.
That's right.
And I read with disappointment that it appeared as though that was going nowhere. And I'd like it to share with us whether any of your friends from Congress have given you any insight into why it failed. And there were a number of aspects to that bill that I think were quite important.
Yep.
Lowering criminal intent standard from willful to knowing recklessness for police misconduct.
Right.
Limiting qualified immunity. Right. Restricting the use of chokeholds. Right. Restricting or eliminating no-knock warrants, and a national registry for police misconduct, just to name a few.
No, all very good things.
So can you give us any insight into why it failed, and which of those pieces or others that I didn't mention you felt were really most important?
Well, after I heard that announcement, I was talking to my friends in Congress before and after. At one point, you may recall the news that Jim Clyburn, who's also a South Carolinian, got in the mix. And, people tried. But, look, I'm going to tell it to you straight because I believe in that. The way it came to me was that Tim said, look, this is not going to help me in my reelect in 2022. We're getting too close to my reelect in 2022. I don't want to be accused of participating in defund the police.
You're referring to Senator Scott?
Yeah, Tim Scott. So he just bagged it and said, it's over. And what I heard from, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law and ACLU and NAACP Inc. Fund and all those guys who I was on the phone with them they said, look, we don't want to give up qualified immunity, but we will if it means we can get a bill through. And so it really wasn't the qualified immunity that killed it, because nobody was going to let the bill go down over one provision that we can come back in 2023 and 24 and try to get. And I reminded people, and others did too, that the '64 Civil Rights Act did not include voting or housing. And yet in 65, we get voting. 68, we get housing. So you can't, nobody was just, if we don't get everything, we don't want anything. I think Tim just calculated things out politically. Here's the thing. Tim sounded good for a while, but I wanted to hear what Mitch McConnell was going to say. Because you still got to come up with 10 more. You and who else is coming along? Okay, maybe Mitt Romney will help you. Maybe Susan Collins. Maybe Lisa Murkowski. I see 3, maybe 4, but where's the rest coming from? We could never. I think it was some combination of his own election and the fact that his caucus wouldn't go there with him.
Tough to lead if nobody's following.
Very tough. But so then what's your answer? You all know how I feel about this stuff. What's your answer then? So when things blow up again, South Carolina is where Walter Scott was shot down, and the jury hung. It took the feds to come in there and get that conviction. What happens next? I mean, if Charleston and Columbia, civil unrest because some tragic event happens, what are you going to say? I mean, aren't we just one tragedy away from another riot? And so I just think that it's incredibly short-sighted. And I also, look, I'll admit I'm a bleeding heart liberal. It's true. But I was raised by a conservative Republican, my father. And so I get how Republicans think. And there's a great Republican argument for doing this. And didn't it kind of amaze you how Trump's like, oh yeah, we're going to pardon this person with a drug conviction, this governor who got caught in the middle of something he shouldn't do. He paid no political price for it. Trump actually signed the First Step Act, which did federal prison reform. Mm-hmm. My thought is, this can be done. Everybody just has to take a piece of it, and let's all jump at the same time. And then it doesn't help us, but it doesn't help you, and it's just bam. And we get to take credit for it and tell anybody what we want. But we couldn't get him to do it. And honestly, I don't really blame Tim Scott. I just think it's really sad that we could not muster the political will. It reminds me of the gun stuff. I'll never forget Sandy Hook. 27 little kids shot down. What do? Nothing. Fires burning up California and Oregon. What do we do about it? I mean, right? I mean, I'm the only one who thinks we're not acting. I mean, it's ridiculous. And we're not acting because we don't know we should act. What we're doing is we're clutching a very unsatisfactory status quo out of fear of what the uncertain future may hold. But we just gotta take a chance, man. We've gotta do something different to make this situation better. And if it doesn't work out right, then we get back to the drawing table.
So let's close out my questions with a follow-up on politics today. Because we're all watching the news. As a former member of the Democratic caucus, do you have any words of advice for your former colleagues who now appear to have formed a circular firing squad?
Yeah, I tell you, it's true. I do worry about this reconciliation bill. It seems to me that everybody just needs to take a big breath and understand that half a loaf is better than no loaf at all. And if you can, some of y'all spent time in Congress, right? On the Hill. Who here was on the Hill? Some of you guys know. John Boehner, remember him? He passed this really conservative budget bill. I think they called it House File 1, and we blocked him. And he said, if they won't take a whole loaf, I'll give them one slice at a time. And by that following August, he had done exactly that. But we've got to understand that if we don't pass some version of this reconciliation infrastructure bill, that it will be demoralizing. And it will be difficult to get people to believe again for a while. And you are going to see reduced turnout in the midterm. And we all know, you watch politics, then you know that whatever president's in power always takes a beating on their first midterm election. Because the others, because we're comfortable because we won the presidency, they're fired up because they lost the presidency, and it kind of shifts back. Kendrick knows what I'm talking about. And so, by the way, his dad and I served in Congress together, so that was great. His parents, wonderful people. And so you've got to come out of there with something, because if you come out, don't you remember when you had kids protesting for immigration reform bill and then we never came up with anything? How many young Latinos were like, y'all can't. I mean, you can't demoralize and disappoint people that much. My solution is, okay, that $3.5 trillion is a 10-year bill. Cut it in half and do it. Joe Manchin should be happy. What's half of 3.5 trillion? 1.75 trillion? He said he'd do 1.5. Close enough. Get it done. And guess what? Get some broadband going, put some fiber optic in the ground, right? Improve some stuff. Make sure you can drive over that bridge without it caving in on you. People will be happy. All the construction workers are going to be like, I'm working, I'm happy. And people will be like, hey, they're effective. They can get things done. And it'll be good. And let me tell you about my Republican friends, and I do have many. They will show up at the ribbon cutting. Don't you dare doubt that. Y'all, they will be at the ribbon cutting. They all were at the. If you go back to Obama passed that big old stimulus bill in like 2009. Remember that? And then a lot of money on some infrastructure. They were all at the ribbon cutting. They're like, this is a boondoggle. Where's my scissors? Where's my shovel? So they'll all be there. So politicians have certain predictable behaviors.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's been great, man. I appreciate you inviting me, and I really enjoyed it.
Not at all. I just want to give you a couple questions we got from folks who submitted.
Sure.
A former UM student, Jillian Blumenthal, asks, what would you suggest young lawyers or law students do to best position themselves early in their career if they desire to be selected to serve on a team like the one you selected in their career?
Here's the thing. Being a good litigator requires you to say, I will. If you think that somebody's just going to somehow recognize you and your talent and your ability and ask you, they're probably not. Say, hey, I would like to be on that. Volunteer for stuff. And the two young lawyers who you never saw them on camera, but they were indispensable. They wrote all the outlines for. They were indispensable. They were I will kind of people. Two young women. One of them named Zuri Balamkund, and the other one was Natasha Robinson. And these two young ladies, they were pulling together the timeline, working on discovery, doing document review. They were grinding, man. They were on it. And the world doesn't know them, but it's going to, because they were like fierce and they were not backing down. So I would say volunteer. The other thing I'd say is don't just volunteer for this case you want to be on, for that case you want to be on. Also volunteer on other stuff. I'm sure at the law firm you're at, assuming you're an associate already or whatever, there is some sort of a employee committee on diversity hiring, we have a fun and wellness committee. Those are the folks who set up the picnic, Be a part of the firm community and show up, get to know people, and then ask the partners about their favorite subject, which is themselves. Just kidding. But be curious about people, right? Be curious about people and get mentors. They're indispensable. People don't mind mentoring. People want to share what they know. So don't, say, hey, how did you do that? How did you approach that? How would you recommend? Have you read anything that I should probably read? And do that, because honestly, people are pretty generous with their time. They really are. And so, do that. And then as you are seeking out mentors, be one. It may not be real clear to you, but I'm telling you, there's a law student who sees you as ahead of them. If you're that young lawyer in that firm, there's a law student who sees you as a second-year associate as a really big deal. And, so bring somebody along as you're trying to be brought along. And those are and then the other thing, do excellent work. Do excellent. I should have said that first. Do excellent work. If you say the memo's going to be done by noon Wednesday, make sure that it is done by noon Wednesday. And if there's some reason in heaven and earth why it can't be, communicate. Hey, you know what? I just had this motion come in that I got to get in. I know I was going to tell you that I was going to get the memo, but would it be okay if I got it to you by 5? If you talk, you usually be like, yeah, that's cool. But if, you said noon and they're waiting for the memo and they got a meeting at 2 o'clock and they ain't heard from you, your stock is going to go down.
That's usually a problem.
Yeah.
So last question, this is from Ben Kuhn, who is a noted alumnus. This is kind of a big one. In our hyper-partisan society, what can lawyers do to promote equity for all people?
That is a super great question. And I would say, as lawyers, sort of sidestep that hyper-partisan stuff and focus on the main thing. So often we get to talk about what actually is a substantive matter that we can work on. Honestly, if I know somebody voted for Trump, I don't really make that the subject of the conversation. Let's talk about the Vikings, or I don't know, in you guys' case, the Dolphins. Y'all support the Dolphins? Any Dolphins fans?
Not everyone.
Okay, one Dolphins fan back there. But, if we were in Minnesota, I said, who supports the Vikings? Every hand would go up. People would be wearing purple ties. It's ridiculous. We never win, and they still don't care.
A lot of us aren't from Miami.
Oh, yeah. So anyway, I would say that solve the problems that are actually meaningful and important, like how can we make this law firm look more like America so that we can get clients who will pay fees. I mean, it's a practical issue, right?
It is.
Yes.
I
mean, but like as a law firm, you can't afford to say, we only want people who look like us to pay us. We want everybody who has, so, a DIY committee did I get that right? A DIE committee becomes important, right? And, get on the committee and then do, and work on the stuff that matters. So often the partisan stuff that we fight over doesn't really matter. Now, sometimes it does. Somebody saying they don't want to wear a mask or something like that, or they're not going to get a shot or whatever, then it's another thing. But we fall out over stuff that doesn't really cut any ice. So I'm the equivalent of a managing partner, I guess, in my law firm, which is a public law office. And I don't know what anybody's political affiliation is. And I say, don't tell me, I don't want to know. Because if I didn't even know you're Republican, you can't accuse me of doing something to you because you were one. I don't want to know. I don't care. And so, but we got a job to do. We got to represent this client. And so I think that is really what lawyers can do, really. And then the other thing is that I believe the reason we have such a hyper-partisan society is because we have dramatic, wide disparities in wealth and income in America. And again, I don't have any problem with you making any profits at your company. I do believe that societies can get to a point where the inequality is so bad that it causes instability. And I think we're not far from that. How else in the world do you have tent cities in every major American city and you're also selling homes for $7 million, $8 million, right? You can go buy, I'm sure that there are some $10 million homes right in Miami that you could buy.
A few.
you know, but you also might drive by a tent city on your way there. Am I wrong? Same thing in Minneapolis. This is bad for society. You know, it's not good. And I think there are social implications for it. I'll also tell you this. I think, Gary, we need to really reflect on the psychosocial impact of the quarantine and COVID. Who here has lost someone close to them to COVID? I lost my mom. That's grief. But you can't even bury him the way you ordinarily would. Am I right? You've been cooped up in the house. We see measures of social well-being bad all around. We see spikes in violent crime. We see domestic violence. We see opioid use. We see all these things around us. Some people are responding with anger and say, I'm not going to wear this damn mask. Other people are just quietly grieving. The point is, we know there's one-on-one counseling and we know there's group counseling. How do you do societal counseling for massive griefs? Nearly 700,000 Americans dead, not to mention the ones who've been hospitalized and all the social consequences. We have not really thought about this. We've got to think about the psychosocial implications of the quarantine and how it is causing very odd reactions. I mean, you know, in the governor's office, they roll it, you know, you have 1,000 people with guns outside the governor's mansion in St. Paul, Minnesota. And y'all saw what happened in Michigan. This is related to people's reaction to what has been a traumatic moment, and they don't really know what to do, and we haven't really thought about what the right response is. Does anybody agree with me about that? You know, and so we've got to start thinking, what does it mean to do grief and trauma counseling for a country? I don't know what the answer is, but I know what the question is. You know, and so I hope all of y'all think about that, because, you know, it's not going to be done as a country. It's going to be done in local communities, and it's going to add up to something. But I do think that this is driving a lot of the stuff that we see, a lot of the aberrant behavior. Who suspects that there's some connection between the quarantine and January 6th? I think there is. I'm not sure what it is, but it's got everybody freaked out. It is causing crazy behavior. So I'll just leave it right there. I wish I had better answers for you, though, Gary.
Attorney General Keith Ellison,
All right.
thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
You bet, man.